Hello, Richard Doyle, founding member SCR. And if you want to learn more about SCR, the history of SCR, or what's going on there, then watch this video and tell your friends about it too. And tell your friends about SCR. Come see us. When I first read Jerry Patch's adaptation of A Christmas Carol, this would have been quite a few years ago. Well, 41 years ago, for that matter. And at the time, doing a Christmas show, to me, in all honesty, as a professional actor in the company, did not attract me in so much as they were not looking for me to play Ebenezer Scrooge. At that time, I would have been probably in my very early 30s. And I was a character actor, and with some versatility in my abilities, I was used quite a bit in the company as a supporting player on a lot of difficult theater, but challenging in a good way. And so I was not so much interested in being in a Christmas show as I was in being in the whatever was the more difficult show being done at the theater at the time. And at that time, actually, when we started to do Christmas Carol, we had just opened the second stage, which when we first moved into the building was a storage facility. And we found that our subscribers kind of missed the old 170 seat third step theater in Costa Mesa. And so David and Mark decided, well, we'll take the what is this storage space, and we'll convert it into a small theater, 150 seats. It was kind of a horseshoe. Those people who have been subscribers to the theater for a long time will remember the old horseshoe second stage. And we did some very, very challenging work in there. And some of the best theater that I did at SCR, particularly in my early years, was on that small stage because it was so compact and the audience was all around us on a horseshoe shape. And we were able to do in there some very small, intimate two-character plays, Frankie and Johnny and the Claire de Lune, Playland. We did a lot of shows that people will remember as being moving, challenging, and some of them a little unnerving. We did Waiting for Godot in there. I remember there oftentimes were quite a few people missing after intermission when we started that show, but I enjoyed doing it. And that was a challenging aspect of being an actor at the theater, was being able to work on both stages. So you had to have a little bigger performance on the main stage, we called it then, and now it's called the Segerstrom Stage, because that was a 500 seat theater. And it was a proscenium, or what we call a thrust. And so a little different style of stage work. And then, but when you came onto the second stage, it was almost a theater in the round. And we only had a back wall to the stage area. And things that were done on that stage scenically were amazing. The things that they were able to do, like on Playland, the Appel play, they made the behind the scenes of an amusement park in South Africa. And they made it look absolutely real and seem real. And so many plays that were done in there, plays with hot tubs on stage, and an old farmhouse in the a play that we did about the farm family what we have here in the United States is our Dust Bowl era during the Great Depression. And it was just palpable, the sound of the wind blowing outside and the sand that was spread all over the set and all over the table and all over the people when they came in. And it was just amazing to see people in the audience so transfixed. And a thing that I used to love about it was they would get so drawn into the stories, and you could feel them and see them, and they would be leaning forward on their knees with their elbows perched up on their knees, looking at the actors and looking at the action, so involved. And I always say that actors, it's a great craft to be able to come on a stage, particularly in a big musical or something, and put people back in their seats, just really drive them back in their seats with this, just the simple power of the stage and the excitement of what's going on. But the thing that I love to do is to get them sitting forward in those quiet moments, just really wanting to be part of what is being shared on stage and the stories that are being told. And as a storyteller, I often characterize myself as a storyteller, and actors are generally storytellers. It's a great technique to be able to draw the audience in and then smash them back in their seats and then get them back to the storytelling. And that second stage was a space that was really capable of doing that. And I love the new theater that we have, which is the Argyros Theater, which is kind of a music box. It has two levels. It's 350 seats, but that has the same aspect of the big theater of being able to do larger things and put the audience back in their seat, but also it has that capability of pulling people in. And so the Argyros has replaced the old second stage, which is now called the Nicholas, in case people are wondering, and it's even smaller, 99 seats. But I particularly like the second stage. And coming back to your question about Jerry Patch's play, in the early days, I did a lot of shows on the second stage, and it ran concurrent with the main stage. So oftentimes, in the early days of that show, of Christmas Carol, I was in a show that conflicted with the running time of Christmas Carol. And so I missed some of those early ones. I think I've done 36 of the 40. And so that was fine. I love Jerry. He's a great friend of mine. I've known him for years and years. He and I were both in the service together during the Vietnam conflict. He luckily got to stay stateside. I, however, got thrust into the thick of it. And but when I came back, I met Jerry, and he had joined the theater. And he's largely responsible for me, running right back to the theater when I came back from the Army, because he was telling me, oh, they need you, things are really happening at SCR. So I contacted David and Martin. They said, absolutely, come back. And so there I was. And in all honesty, I sometimes credit the fact that I came back at all from Vietnam with that having in my heart the feeling and the thought that I was coming back to SCR because I had to finish something that I felt I had started there with SCR back in 1964 when I joined the company. But the reason that I am at SCR at all is that as a young actor, and I was a professional actor at 13. So I was in San Francisco, and my father was a serviceman. And that's why we were in San Francisco, because he was stationed at Hunters Point. My brother was an actor with the Actors Workshop. His name was Robert Doyle, and he was, I just adored him. I worshiped my brother. He was a fantastic actor, wonderful artist. And being a member of the Actors Workshop in San Francisco, and also kind of looking after me, because my father was in the service. My mother had to come to LA quite frequently because her father was ill. So I was under his arm, carted off from Hunters Point to downtown San Francisco to the workshop. And so at the workshop, I met all these people, and they said to my brother, well, you've got Ricky with you. Why don't we put Ricky in a show? And so they had a kind of a family theater adjunct to the workshop that performed at the old Encore, which was a subterranean theater in downtown San Francisco, in a little cable car in the lobby. Those who know it probably will know that. And anyway, I was put in shows there. I worked with Bob Phelan, Susan Darby, and Tom Roski, and my brother, and other actors from the workshop. So fast forward now, several years, my father got transferred to Long Beach, California, and I had to, trundle down to Lakewood, California, which is where he lived. I felt like I'd been dropped off the edge of the earth there from San Francisco to Lakewood. And so I started looking around for something to do, and there was a junior college there in Lakewood. So I trundled off to this junior college, Long Beach City College, and enrolled in a drama class. And there was a teacher there. In his first year of teaching, his name was David Ems. And he walked into the classroom, and he looked at the roll in front of him of the list of students that enrolled in rehearsal and performance. And he called out to the class. We were seated in a theater, and I, of course, was sitting in the back, kind of acting artsy with my black turtleneck on. And he said, who's Richard Doyle? And I raised my hand, and he called me down to the front of the room. And he says, are you related to Robert Doyle of the workshop? And I said, yes, he's my brother. And he said, well, I'll shorten this, but in short, he said, well, if you're as good as he is, we're starting a theater, and we'd like you to come down, and I'd like you to come down and meet the rest of the company. And we're looking for actors. And so I did. I trundled off down to a little marine swap shop that they had acquired from David's father, or stepfather, Sam Ems. And I was introduced to everybody, and come to find out that they had all been students. David Ems and Martin Benson, Jack Davis, Art Acoustic, Don Took, all these people had been students at San Francisco State College, and they had been theater students. And of course, they had gone into town and seen numerous plays at the Actors Workshop. My brother was in many of them, played the Fool in King Lear with Michael O'Sullivan as Lear, and he played Stanley in The Birthday Party, the world premiere of The Birthday Party. And so they knew Bobby. And so they welcomed me into that company. I was 19 years old at the time. And that's how I joined SCR. And so, yes, I looked on those, David Ems and Martin Benson, and also a gentleman who has passed on named Jack Davis. I looked on them as brothers, and even in some cases as a father figure, because they were guiding me on what to do with what gifts I had. I actually had been an entertainer since I was a little kid. But becoming an actor, actually, this is a side note, but it's kind of interesting. Becoming an actor in plays didn't occur to me until we were in San Francisco, or rather in Naples, Italy, with my father, again, transferred to another duty station in southern Italy, in Naples. And I was dragged to a high school play production that my brother was in of A Christmas Carol, in which my brother played Ebenezer Scrooge. And I sat in that audience and watched this play, the first time I had seen a play. And I looked to my mother, and the play was over, and I said, I want to do what Bobby's doing. I want to do a play. I was about 9 or 10 years old at the time. And of course, it only took me about, 50, 60 more years to get to it. But now finally I get to do Scrooge in Christmas Carol, and I welcome the opportunity. I could tell you, as even a 10-year-old child, watching that, I still remember that, and I didn't have very many visual theater experiences to relate to at the time, because there was no TV in Italy at that time. This was 1952, something like that, and so. Most of the theater I heard was on recorded albums or plays that I read that my brother left around that I looked at. And so it stuck with me, the performance, even though it was done by young, high school students. My brother, was quite good as Scrooge, but he was still a 17, 18-year-old kid. But it stuck with me, that transformation that Scrooge went through, and all the ghosts coming to impact on him, telling him that the good things that had happened in his life. And I thought, that's an amazing kind of story. And I was a storyteller, and I would relate the story. I would take over if my mother and father had guests over to our house, and they allowed me to stay up. I would often, pigeonhole some of the gathered guests with my storytelling, which oftentimes left reality behind, and I had to be corrected by my mother that what I was saying was, a little bit perhaps not supported by facts. And of course, I would answer that by saying, well, people would ask me, well, you don't seem old enough to have done those things, Ricky. And I landed on the idea that, well, these things happened to me when I was older. And I seem to think that I answered the questions. But anyway, I loved telling stories, and I latched onto that story from Christmas Carol. My mother said I would retell it oftentimes using other people as the characters in the story. And I think that I carried that forward. And when we got into San Francisco and I got to work with these professional actors, I also got to understand the idea of characterization and people playing different roles. And in the Christmas Carol, it was the idea that the core company, made up of many gifted character actors, we were going to play several different roles. And even though I wasn't playing Scrooge, I liked the idea of playing one character, say, playing Fred, or playing one of the solicitors, or playing a ghost, and then putting on a different costume or some makeup, or maybe different, beards and mustaches and sideburns and what have you. That would give me a chance to tell the story from many different ways. And I think audiences came to appreciate that form of storytelling. And in fact, I actually think that play, under John David Keller's direction, the early direction, and with Jerry's adaptation and Hal's portrayal, as it grew over the years, it began to attract people to the theater in general. I mean, not just theater SCR, but theater RE. The idea, this is kind of fun. This is like going to a storyteller session. And I oftentimes, when I talk to young actors, I say, you're part of a very, very old trade. And they always think I'm referring to, the Greco-Roman theater or something of that nature. And I said, no, this goes back to early man, when that one outcast in the tribe who wasn't a very good hunter and hid behind the rocks and trees would come out after the kill was made and everyone was sitting around the fire with full bellies, having devoured some of the woolly mammoth. He would come out and retell the events of the hunt around the fire, and he became the tribe storyteller, which may have saved his life in the long run, because he couldn't do what other people did, and he might not have been afforded any of the food, but he earned it by telling stories. And I tell them, that's what you are, that very old tradition of telling stories about the lives of the people who are seated around that fire. And that's what we do. And that's, I think, the attraction of Christmas Carol, is that it came to relate to the audience gathered there, stories about them as much as about the characters in the play. And I think they sit there pulling for the eventual epiphany that Scrooge has, that I think when they jump to their feet, not taking anything away from the enjoyment that they're having, I think that they are applauding themselves in as much as anything, saying, yeah, we're good people at heart. There's goodness here. There's more good than evil, and good triumphs, at least tonight. And I think that's what attracts me to being part of it. I can say what I've just described to you about the experience of the play for the audience goes triple this year because of the COVID thing. And because people have been so encumbered by all the COVID restrictions in place and the protocols, that the idea that even though they have to come to the theater and be vaccinated or have proof that they are currently immune from any virus infection, that even though they have to wear the masks, there is a release that the show provides, the experience as audience going through this evening, going through Scrooge's journey and being engaged with the cast as they carry Scrooge along through this journey to his epiphany. That feeling is so important to us as a culture. And if I could say anything to people that watch your Zoom or that hear what we're doing here today, I would say, we're open now. So come and see us. and experience theater and experience this particular piece of theater, because really it, as much as anything we do, invites you to join in, because audience is really a part of the of live theater, more than in a movie theater. Not to take anything away from motion pictures or television. I've been part of that entertainment industry as well. But the live theater is there's a synergy that exists between the audience and the actors on stage. We work together to bring all of us to that moment at the end that hopefully you are just so taken with what you have just seen and so reassured that life is going to be better and as good as it is and can get better if we just join together as we are tonight in the theater and take in the story and really enjoy what it has to offer and share it with all the audience around you. I think there's an interesting story that's told about a study that was done about theater audiences, and that there is a point in the evening in the theater when people are engaged and really drawn in to the experience of the theater and reaching the point where the story reaches its peak, where the audience is so engaged that they become almost one with what they're watching. And at that point, they test the pulses of the audience, and they all have, as one organism, kind of the same heart rate. So people get drawn in so much so that they become one. And now that can't be expected for all productions. And I certainly have been in shows where people have differing senses of how to relate to what they were seeing and how relevant what they're seeing was to their own personal lives. And thank you for enduring those performances. We know there are going to be some of those, but Christmas Carol is not one of them. It's one you will join in. I can almost promise you that. And that's why I like to be engaged in Christmas Carol. And besides, in all honesty, the challenge of undertaking this monumental journey that this man has to go through, and though I have watched it as other characters, I have not portrayed that character. And just to put in the back of your psyche that the performance that they saw of the earlier version of this production, that was a performance that was developed over 40 years of performance in front of different audiences with a lot of input from different casts, some fine actors having played the roles, and also many different changes that Jerry very graciously stepped in and made little tweaks here and there. The performance that you saw just recently, Buell, that performance was achieved in one rehearsal period over 3 or 4 weeks with a relatively new cast, including a new me. But everything was there. Everything was planted in there for us because we had all been part of it. Many of us, only a few had seen it or been part of it, but many of us had been part of that experience, including the audience. And it was so reassuring to step out there and go through the first few scenes and realize, oh, it's still there. It's still working. It's still got the audience engaged. And that was very reassuring. And it just made us all feel really good that the audience was hearing it and enjoying it once again and being back in the theater again. That's such a great feeling. I think that, and again, John David Keller's production, Hal Landon's performance, Jerry Patch's adaptation, and all the shows that were done, many of which I was part of, they were all great shows. But the great thing about theater, it's an interpretive art. And so we were able to join that adaptation for the first time, Hisa and I, Hisa Takakuwa, who was the director, and Hisa and I had a chance last year to do the recorded novella of Christmas Carol, which of course the novella is it's a book, and that is not a play, and it has to be made into a play. And that's what Jerry did. And so we visited the novella, and then I recorded the novella as a voiceover, a placekeeper, essentially, for our audiences, because we weren't going to have a live show last year. So Hisa and I worked on that. She became what we refer to in the voiceover world as a booth director in her home, sitting like you are, Buell, at a screen. And I became a voiceover talent, which I am, sitting at my home system. You can't see it here, but I have a recording system here in my home. And I recorded that novella much as Charles Dickens would have done when he read it for a Victorian audience back in the 1840s. And we gave that to our subscribers. And that opportunity that Hisa and I had to do that as a team gave us a kind of teamwork relationship. And in that relationship, we discussed what we both wanted from this production to be more prominent than what we had seen in previous incarnations of the show. And basically what that was, we wanted all of those vignettes, if you will, with all the ghosts to be as able to move Scrooge back into those moments and be as affecting to him and the audience as we could make them dramatically without slowing down the pace of the show, keeping the show moving, but showing that we were engaged in storytelling primarily. And this is part of the story. So things like the scene with Marley. The scene with Marley is not so much about Marley coming through the door and being a very scary figure, which he has always been. Going back to Don Tooke's Marley, who was very scary. But now he is Scrooge's friend and partner, going way back to Fezziwigs. And now he appears as a spirit, warning Scrooge if he doesn't change. And we have to know that Scrooge is deeply affected by this because of their friendship, because he's seeing him and he needs for Marley to help him, tell him what to do, tell him what he's doing. And Marley leaves. He only tells him that he has an opportunity to change what will come. And then when we go to the Ghost of Past, who is Jennifer Parsons, a wonderful actress, and my wife, who also happens to be here in the apartment, so I have to be careful what I say about her. And anyway, she comes and she shows me all these things, reminds me about where he was born in the country, reminds me about his school that he went to and his school chums and how they went home for Christmas and he could not. And some of the dark times in his life when he was a child, and dark times but that were made lighter when Fan shows up and says he gets to come home because Fan, his wonderful, kind and cheerful sister, a really bright spot in his life, he'd almost forgotten about her. He put that out of his mind as if it never existed. But it's because of her that he even exists, really, because she puts that red scarf around his neck and drags him off back home again for Christmas. A red scarf, which we wanted to be sure reappeared in the story so that the audience made the connection. Oh, this is one of the driving forces that brings him back. We wanted them to know the story behind the story, which is really what drives any play. And sometimes we get to need so much to get to what the good parts are when Scrooge comes back to us as a human being again, that sometimes we skip over the things that really brought him there. And so that's what Hisa and I did in this production, was to focus on those moments, his understanding of Fred's life now, his nephew, and his understanding of what he missed about his life that he brought forward from Fezziwigs, because Fezziwig was such a nurturing person. Even though Scrooge didn't have a nurturing father, he had many nurturing people in his life. His Fan, his Fezziwig, who made him feel like a human being and made him feel like he wanted to be part of what Fezziwig was doing. And he forgot that he had someone whom he was basically mentoring, it was his clerk, Bob Cratchit, who he had been kicking around for years. And suddenly in that scene with Past, he realizes, you know, I don't know why, but I feel like I would like to say something to my clerk, Bob Cratchit. And he doesn't even know what he's going to say. He just is somehow, he's been carried away by this experience of seeing Fezziwig again. So we wanted to invest in those moments as we went along so that we got to the end. The audience not only enjoyed the end, but now in the show, when they see that red scarf come out, I hear people in the audience say, oh, it's the red scarf. It's the red scarf again. It's his red scarf. And I love that idea in storytelling. It sends chills up my spine when I think about it. And then, you know, of course, wonderful how was able to do that great somersault on the bed and grab his hat. And of course, I am quite a bit further along than Hal was when he started, so I have to demur to him on that particular physical attribute. But we needed something to put a cap on the end of that bedroom wake-up scene, and we came up with the idea of Scrooge puts his hat back in the armoire, not thinking, and goes ahead and gets dressed. And then the hat reappears, and I don't want to give away anything to our viewers who haven't seen it, but the hat reappears with an interesting and uplifting kind of new sentiment around the hat that he says he never goes anywhere without his hat. And he pops it on his head, and off he goes on his Christmas morning epiphany, as he meets all the people that he engaged with in a kind of Frank Capra movie moment, as he meets all these people who actually were people he had seen on the street before, but somehow they've come back now as ghosts in his dreams. But he sees them again as who they were in his real life. And I love that moment too, because it's a bit of storytelling as well, until he finally ends up back with his nephew in that scene at Fred's, which is a scene that has always filled my heart with a lot of joy. And I think judging from how our audiences are responding to it, it still has that effect on people. And I'm very glad for that. I am supported by a wonderful cast of people. I won't go into naming them all, but they all know that I respect them, highly respect them. They were very respectful of me and very supportive of me. And I can tell you that something like this doesn't happen in a void. You need an ensemble of people. And these are definite ensemble players. They support the truth of every character in the show. And there is no character in the story that needs the supportive truth of all his fellow ensemble members as Ebenezer Scrooge. And they are there for me every moment of this performance. I stand on stage and look around and see it in their eyes. Believe me, you are going to see an ensemble performance that I think is very moving. I think that COVID-19 notwithstanding, we had reached in that almost 2-year period of time, it's hard to believe, we had reached in that at the end of that 2-year period of time, an end to an era that had kind of come over us like a little bit of a cloud that had kind of shut out some sun. And I think people had we started to notice that there was a bit of a decline in our people would characterize it at the South Coast Repertory. I'm not putting words in their mouth, I don't think, but as a difference in the way people were accessing entertainment. They weren't necessarily purchasing a season of something. They would maybe buy a single ticket to a play that they thought was nice or that they might enjoy. And one of the things that they did seem to regularly enjoy was Christmas Carol. And I think that this was an opportunity. We knew if we brought this back and gave them their opportunity to come to the theater and realize the joy of sitting in that audience with some fellow theater goers, even masked, and enjoying a play that they knew from when they walked through the door that they were going to go on a journey that was going to give them joy and a sense of wonder about what good things might lay ahead in this new year, hopefully post-COVID. But at any rate, and I think that what made me want to do it was the opportunity to bring people back to the theater for an evening of theater. And theater is a special thing. It's not theater ER, not the building, because it's just a building. It's a pretty building, but without something going on that stage, which is theatrical, which engages the audience in the storytelling. So we're doing 80 to 90% of the storytelling, the physical heavy lifting, but there's a good 15, maybe even 20%, some say 10, but there's a measurable percentage of that storytelling, which the audience is doing with us. And you're part of that storytelling. And you can only be aware of that really sensory as an actor on stage when there are children in the audience. And they just get so wrapped up, and the parents get so wrapped up in those children seeing it and enjoying it, that over the years, they've come back time and time again, bringing those kids as they grow up until those kids have grown and are bringing their own kids. And so I think that I wanted to be part of that, to bring people back to a theater that I started when I was a teenager. I mean, literally, I was 19 years old. This is approaching 60 years and in this county. And we have been the theater that has endeavored to provide that theater service to this county and to Orange County theater goers, not because we all wanted to be the stars, because we weren't always the stars, or that we wanted to own the county, no, or that because we wanted to make tons of money, because theater is not notorious for being a way to great economic wealth. It's really done by people who just love to do it, and seen by people who, if they haven't found the love, they're going to find it again, and start, I would say, by coming to Christmas Carol, because it has all those things that if you've been before, you remember loving. And if you haven't been, you will find again in this production of Christmas Carol. I'm told that is very true. And I feel that if you think you can trust me for almost six decades of doing this, I think I know it when I feel it. And I feel it about this show. It has that ability to bring you out of these doldrums and point you in the direction of some hopeful thoughts and feelings for the new year. So we're open. Come see us. I think that it is unique, I have found, because it is the embodiment of a resident professional theater. And I mean that because we all grew up here. I mean, I literally grew up here. From my teenage years, I raised my families here. My son and his grandson, my daughter and her 3 grandchildren. My mother and father lived here. Actually, they lived in Lakewood, but they came here to see the theater. I have so many friends. All my doctors are here. All the restaurants that I enjoy are all here. And the people who live in this county and who inhabit the various educational institutions, UCI notwithstanding, all these people who are here who have supported the theater, they are part of the SCR community. And if you are a writer who is seeking to find a place to have your text, your work of theatrical literature seen and enjoyed and engaged with by a very smart, engaged audience, SCR is a great place to do it. And SCR has always been, from my very earliest memories, a play about, or rather a theater about the plays, about the text, about the writers. All of our new plays all of the plays that we do, new or old, chestnuts, or plays that are classical plays, all of them, the focus has always been on the text. Um, just veering away from SCR for a second, speaking about text, I became, about a decade ago, well, actually several decades ago, I became a voice talent. And in the world of voices, you don't have scenic support. You don't have other actors around helping you, unless you're doing an animated series, which I've done. But a lot of the narrations that I have done, including I narrate for the Pageant of the Masters, I've been there for about 10 years. All of those narration venues, or all those narration jobs for documentary films and what have you, they all rely on the text, and it's all in the words. The story is in the words, and in the way the words are punctuated, and the way the sentences are put together. And working directly with the writer, you work to develop that story from just the words. And I became so aware as I became a voice talent, more so than I had ever been, how important text is. And when you come to the theater, you're going to hear stories. You're going to hear plays that maybe you might have seen somewhere else and not noticed before. That, oh, I see now what that's about. And at SCR, you will always see and hear the stories told very clearly and succinctly by very gifted professional artists. And that's the other thing that I love about SCR, is that even back in the day when we actually weren't paid, even though some of us were professionals, we still worked at SCR because we longed for that stage experience where the text and the story was primary, not the star that was saying the words, or how celebrated the person was that was engaged in the play, or how famous the play was, but it was about the story within the play. And we were all trained to tell those stories. I became even more trained to tell stories as a voice talent. And when we came to this production of A Christmas Carol, Hisa and I wanted very much to be sure we focused on those central issues within those individual stories within the larger tale of A Christmas Carol. And I think when you come to SCR, not only in Christmas Carol, but when you come to SCR as a patron or as a theater goer to see whatever we're doing, you're going to hear the story, and you're going to see that story told in all of its facets. And I love that about a professional theater. And by facets, I mean, you see the story told in the costumes, in the lighting, in the scenic development, in the soundscapes that people don't even realize sometimes, that the soundscape sometimes begins when you walk into the theater. You're not even aware it's going on, but it's being planted in there. All these little tidbits about the story you're about to see unfold. And that's a professional rep theater. And that's been in SCR's mind from the beginning, even though, in all honesty, from the beginning, we didn't have the funds or the wherewithal to do all the things that we now can do. But even in the beginning, we had it in our minds to focus on doing them. And I think that even at the beginning, that's what drew people to go to a little 80-seat theater in an old marine swap shop and buy a ticket just to see what this South Coast Repertory thing was about. You look at a wonderful community like Irvine, just closely around the theater, and the extended community of Costa Mesa, and then down into Newport Beach and Mission Viejo. Those communities do not grow if you don't have places for people to practice their faith, places for people to be educated, places where emergency services can be provided, whether they be hospitals or law enforcement or fire departments, and very importantly, right in there with all those, the arts. You must have the arts, because the arts give people a look at cultural developments and a look at where their community is growing and maybe where it's lacking, that no other venue can give you. You can watch TV shows and sit back on your couch, but you can't, or go into a movie theater and sit with a few, maybe 100 or so other people and watch in a movie theater, kind of separated from it. But when you go into the theater to see a play or see a story told in the text of a play, you are in a group of people who are maybe like-minded, maybe not, people who live in your community, people who look like you, but maybe they look different, because now maybe some of the people in the plays they're seeing, they look different too. And suddenly you become aware that you're in a community, much as when you go to a baseball game, say. And I don't downgrade the importance of sports in the community. That's important too. But you go to a ball game and you're focused on the ball game. But if you happen to sit back and look around you, you realize, well, there's a great cross section of people here. And in the theater, it's the same. But the cross section is of people who are like-minded about cultural events. And you need those cultural events to go and share with people who have your like interests in the storytelling technique of live stage theater. And it enriches the very idea of living where you live. This SCR, and I've said this many times to people, but it's true. SCR is Orange County's own resident repertory, professional resident repertory theater, your own theater, just as if you had your own, university in your community, or your own school in your community, or a place where you go to practice your faith. SCR is your professional theater. And for some people, cultural things they liken to a faith, where they go and practice feelings they have about their culture that they live in, and what they would like to see it do, what it has done that has been done wrong, and how they might improve it. You can see those things in the theater, see them talk about them with theater goers, and leave the theater talking about them. And I think SCR, I like to think, is a place where you will find people leaving SCR theater after seeing a performance, and they'll be either quiet because they're thinking about what they just saw, or if they're leaving the theater talking, hopefully they are talking about what has just engendered interest in them in a subject they'd never thought about before. And I think that is why you have a professional theater in your community. And you have one. It's called South Coast Repertory, and we wouldn't be anywhere else. We love it here. Hello, Richard Doyle, SCR founding member since the early days of SCR. And I just wanted to say to you, thank you if you have been a patron of SCR or a theater goer at SCR. And if you hadn't been back in a long while, please come back. We are open, and we would like you to come and see us. And if you'd like to, you can come and see the Christmas Carol, although I wouldn't recommend it. Whenever anyone says Christmas to me, I say, bah! Come back. Now, please come see us and have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Take care.